The talk today is called FOSS Teaches You Twice, or perhaps 3 times. My lawyers keep telling me that I have to keep reminding people that Linux is a trademark of Linus Torvalds. He would like people to use the term Linux for anything, any legitimate purpose. So if you'd like to have a Linux product, Linux branded clothes, Linux branded cars, it's perfectly okay. All we ask is that you go to Linux Foundation's site and register that, free of course, so we can protect the Linux trademark. And Unix is a trademark of Xopen in several countries. And this is important because it's used as a brand to be able to brand a set of interfaces, which means that you can create a Unix or Unix-like operating system without having to ask anybody's permission, including SCO. Now, I purposely didn't want to have Brian introduce me because I wanted to say that I've had a large number of different jobs in my career. I've been a programmer, I've been a systems administrator, but for this particular talk, the most important thing is I have been an educator at the college level. I taught for 3.5 years full-time. I taught another 4 years at night. So I've been where a lot of you people as educators are. I assume a lot of you are educators. Some of you are students. Maybe you're students who are interested in education. And when I was teaching back in 1977, a lot of times my students were touching a computer keyboard for the first time. There were no computers in the homes, or very few. There were very few computers in high schools or things like that. They would come in, and in a 2-year period of time, we would take them from knowing literally nothing about how a computer worked, all the way up to being able to design simple operating systems, design simple compilers, things like that. So I've been there, I've done a lot of this work, and I have a little Dilbert thing on the bottom there. It's a little cartoon that basically says, you do all this stuff, but all it means is you're really old. Now, a lot of people say, what are the goals of education? Okay, and it's definitely not to babysit kids. I don't think that it's a place where we should be having to teach kids how to react to other people. This is stuff that should be taught in the family, by the family. A lot of people think that we're supposed to be training people for jobs, and I don't think that education, particularly at the college level, should be doing that either. We shouldn't be training somebody for a specific job, because if we do, that job's going to be probably gone in a short period of time. What should we be doing? I think that we should be creating a thinking electorate. I think we should be creating a thinking workforce. I think we should be creating somebody who can gain a lifetime of knowledge by learning how to learn. How do you go after, how do you find information? How do you make differentiation between one thing and another? This is what we should be teaching. And if we do research, then research is done a lot of times in public universities with the public money. And we should not be making these people have to pay twice for the research, once when it's funded in the public university and once when they buy it as a product. Now, if you're doing private research with private money, money that comes from a company or something like that, okay, the company may have a right to the intellectual property that comes from that research. But if the private company is funding a university to do that, then a lot of the knowledge and information that was in that research was actually funded again by the public. And maybe that specific problem was funded by the corporation, but still there's a certain amount of ownership that comes from us, the people, in doing that. Now, believe it or not, at one time, I was a college student. I was 18, 19 years old. I knew what I was going to do in the world. And I was going to school in Drexel University in Philadelphia. And back in those days, if you wanted to buy a compiler for an operating system, it might cost 100,000 US dollars per copy. And of course, as a college student, I didn't have that type of money. I could barely afford a beer at the end of the day. So when I wanted to go out and find a text editor or something like that, I went to this little organization called DECUS, Digital Equipment Corporation User Society. And they had a library of software that I could purchase for, say, $5. And I would send away an order form for that, and back in the mail would come a paper tape. And I would read that paper tape in on my ASR 33 teletype, and everything, life was sweet, okay? Now, $5 was still a lot of money back in those days, because $5 could actually get you 10 pitchers of beer down at the railroad bar. And so I had a choice between a text editor and 10 pitchers of beer. And I think you can see in what direction I went a lot of the times. But this was free and open source software. It was written by people who were not necessarily what we would consider to be professional programmers. They were engineers, they were mathematicians, they were scientists, they were people who had a job to do, and they were using this wonderful new contraption called a computer to do it. And they would write this software and contribute it to the DECUS library. So I had the perfect right to take that software and buy some new paper tape, stick it through the ASR 33 teletype, and duplicate that software and sell it to my roommates for $1 a copy. What they got was software that I had already tested, found out it was pretty good, and they didn't have to send away for it. They didn't have to wait for it to come in the mail. They didn't have to spend their $5 to get it. They got it from me for $1 a piece. And by the time I made 10 copies of it, I'd paid for the new paper tape, I'd paid for the original software, and I had, in effect, a free copy. Oops, I don't know what that is. And I had my 5 pitchers of beer. And so it all worked out great. And what they were paying for was a service of duplicating and providing that software. Now, why didn't the people who wrote the software want to sell it? Well, like I said, they weren't professional software people. To sell software is actually quite hard, because after you've created the software, you have to create good documentation. After you create the software, you need to test it. You need to set up some type of support mechanism. There's a lot of work to doing it, and these people had their own job to do. So they contributed the software to DECUS. And there was a variety of other reasons why they would do this. Number one, they went to these DECUS meetings. And sometimes when they went there, somebody would say, hey, that's a great piece of software you wrote, you know? Maybe I can help you improve it. Or, that's a great piece of software you wrote. Maybe I can take you out and buy you a beer. Or, that's a great piece of software you wrote, let me buy you dinner. Or even better yet, that was a great piece of software you wrote, how would you like to come and work for me? All the same reasons why people tend to write free software today. Now, people say it can't be very good because these are amateurs. They're not professional software writers. Well, that depends on your definition of amateur. And I think that we could say that perhaps there are amateur athletes who are in the Olympics who are actually in better physical shape or even better athletes than the so-called professional athletes. Certainly if you take a look at professional baseball players, you know. So who is the better type of person in being an athlete? Or take a look at amateur painters. A lot of the great painters through the ages have actually been amateurs, or people who were under some type of in effect, a scholarship to create these paintings. They weren't necessarily professional painters. So the definition of amateur versus professional only means that the professional gets paid money to do what they're doing. And an amateur could be equally good or even better than the so-called professional. Now, as I said, this was all happening in 1969, but there's 2 other things that happened in 1969 I want you to remember for a while because we'll see them later. Number 1, Unix was started in Bell Laboratories in New Jersey. Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie decided to start this little thing that later became to be Unix. And they did it just as a research project for fun. Because they were in Bell Labs, a research organization, they were given the ability to do this. And they never dreamed that this would become a mainstay operating system generating millions and billions of dollars of revenue. It was just something they did because they were interested in it. And also in 1969, little recognized in a lot of places, but certainly by two parents in Helsinki, Finland, Linus Torvalds was born. And again, we'll see more about him later too. Now, what is the importance to students of creating free software and free software in general? Well, a lot of people say, well, we're going to use this proprietary software because it's used in the industry, that people will want to, we teach you the students about these proprietary products because lots of people use them. The problem with teaching about proprietary products is if that's the focus, then every time a company goes out of business or every time a product is no longer shipped, maybe we should take back the diploma that we gave these students or take back the certification that we gave them. This is a false economy. What we should be teaching them is the basics of how the software works. So there was a telephone company called Nortel. It was the second largest telephone company on the face of the earth. And in a period of about 2 years, Nortel went bankrupt. And all the people that had Nortel certification or had spent a lot of time learning about the products of Nortel, all of a sudden realized they had to be retrained in order to be able to have another job. Apollo, at one time, was one of the world's largest computer systems, and they went bankrupt. And actually, they were bought by another company. And if people say, well, this is why I buy my software from a very, very large company like Microsoft, then I'll point to Apollo or Wang or Digital Equipment Corporation or Compaq or any one of these companies that is no longer with us.